Everybody will come on in and take a seat. And tonight we're going to have Mr. AJ and Mr. Alex leading us in a song. And then Mr. Joshua Claunch is going to lead us in an invitation song. So grab a book and really sing out for these guys and help them out. What was your invitation song number? 911. Be grabbing a book, turn to 911, and then we'll let AJ and Alex come up and lead their song.
We'll be singing 625 Zion's Call. First and third verse. Zion's calling, land and sea, living us to realms of love. While the light from the throne shines for you and me, let us listen to the call of love. Zion's call is ringing, coming from the throne of God. Oh, we hear it ringing. Let us sing the call of love. We tarry, there is work to do, and our strength cometh from above. As we labor and wait, we must all be true. Let us listen to the call of love. Zion's call is ringing, coming from the throne of God. Lord, we hear it ringing. Let us sing the call of love. 548. 548. Lily of the Valley. No, first and second. I have found a friend in Jesus. He's everything to me. He's the marriage of 10,000 to my soul. He's the lily of the valley, and him alone I see. All I need to cleanse and make me fully whole. In sorrow he's my comfort, in
Good evening. It's good to see everyone out this evening. Weather's a little dicey, but hey, we needed the rain. It's about time we had some cooler temperatures. I hope your week is going good so far. Muhammad Ali was always a rather colorful figure. I'm sure most of you here tonight are familiar with him. Some of you younger guys may not be, I don't know. But he was one of the most skilled boxers to ever set foot in the ring. He was brash, bold, outspoken, and he often ruffled feathers with his antics. He wasn't known for his inspirational quotes, especially early in his career. But in retirement, he began to see things a little differently. He mellowed with age. Some of you guys can probably relate to that. And he began to embrace the new identity of being a role model. And as he reflected on the many lessons that he had learned throughout his life, he left us with several inspirational quotes. One of which, the one I want to share with you tonight, is don't count the days, make the days count. Again, don't count the days, make the days count. It's really simple. Almost a little corny, really. I mean, if you think about it. Depends on how you look at it. But I ask you this, how often are we guilty of counting the days, of looking forward with anticipation of things to come? And I have to admit, I'm terrible at this. On Monday morning, I'm looking to Monday evening, that quitting time. Monday evening, I'm looking forward to the weekend. You get the picture. I'm sure some of you can probably relate, at least a little bit. But the problem with this way of thinking, we fail to live in the moment. You see, this quote isn't encouraging us to throw caution into the wind and live vicariously without considering the future, but it does call upon us to relish the time that we currently have. Psalm 90, verse 12, so teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Psalm 39, verse 4, O Lord, make me know my end, and what is the measure of my days? Let me know how fleeting I am. We need to realize that we have a limited amount of time here, and because of that, we need to seek the wisdom from above, that comes from above. We need to strive each day to live in view of eternity, live each day knowing that we serve a mighty, merciful God. We need to live each day focused on doing His will, and in doing so, hopefully leading others to Him. We need to do our best to make each day count. This evening, here in just a second, you're going to be presented with an opportunity to make today count. You may be here this evening. You may be in need of the prayers of this congregation. You may be here, and this may be the day that you've come to realize that you need to put Christ on in baptism. Whatever your need, please come as we stand and sing. Bring Christ your broken life, so marred by sin. He will create anew, make whole again. Your empty, wasted years, He will restore. And your iniquities
It is so good to see each of you here this. We have a few additions to our prayer list. First of all, that we need to make. Excuse me. We need to continue to keep Leah Hackney in our prayers. They are at home. Austin today said they are doing, I guess, as well as they could be and are stocked up on as much as they could be, except for sleep. So I guess pray that they can get some rest and recovery now that they're home. Also, I would like to mention Kim and I and our family, if you would be praying for us. Kim's mom has decided to stay with us from now on. We're thankful for that. There's a little bit of hoops that we're going to have to jump through as a family, so be praying that we can have the strength to make it through these things, and we'd appreciate that. We also need to keep Daniel Harden in our again, he is going through some difficult times. From what I last heard, he is back at UAB at this moment. So, again, just be prayerful and mindful of him. Is there anything else or anyone else that we need to add to our prayer list or updates to those who are on it? All right, well, let's definitely keep them, whole family, in our prayers too. Anyone else, again, prayers or updates to those on the prayer list? Yes, sir. Okay. All right, continue to be prayerful of Paul's mom. She is still in the hospital right now. Virginia, okay. Also, I think Beverly is homesick too as well, so let's be prayerful for all of those of our congregation. By if you would keep in mind, tomorrow night is going to be the Halloween party. That will be at our house at 6 p.m. Guys bring desserts, girls bring drinks. We'll say parents, if you show up to drop your kids off, you can come inside and stay, and we won't force you to leave. So we'll give you a corner to take a nap in. Also, if you would keep in mind, November 6th will be the Wings Ladies Bible. November 9th, we'll be doing 10th will be Monday night for the Master. We'll be having a also the East Walker Church. Make sure you've signed up that list if you like one of those. And this coming area-wide Devo at Cordova, so parents keep that in mind. Is there anything else that we need to make mention of before we dismiss in prayer? Or if you would, let's bow our heads. Our dear loving and gracious and almighty Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight thankful for this time, this place, people that we can gather together with, that we can learn and pray that our lives will be something that is glorifying and uplifting to you. With those that we've mentioned tonight, those that are sick, those that are dealing with losses, that you would be with them and comfort them as only you know how to do. Again, we thank you for Christ. We thank you for the blood that covers us from sin. And it's in His name. Amen. Classes can take place. All right, good evening. We are finishing up our study tonight in the book of Joshua. So if you would, if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open to Joshua. Let's go with chapter 22. We'll kind of button up some of the last things we had in that chapter. All right, Joshua 22. We'll pick up with about verse 30, 32, somewhere in there in just a moment. Now, again, remember, we have the Israelites have essentially conquered all the land. There's a few pockets of peoples that have kind of either weaseled their way in, or as it phrases it there, they're unable or they did not drive them out. We'll get a little bit of thought on that in just a moment. But the thought is they're done. They're accomplished with the majority of the conquest. Joshua called everybody there. He'd sent on the one half of the army, or the 2.5 tribes worth of army from the other side. There was that kind of back and forth where, they thought, well, they're setting up their own place of worship, their own altar for God. It was just that misunderstanding. And that's what I want to focus on for just a minute, because I know I ended on it last week, but I want all of you to be aware of the importance that at least I see. Maybe you don't see it, but think of how badly this could have gone if either side had just had an itchy trigger finger, as we say. You've got one side, it was the east side of Jordan. Then you've got the other side, the 2.5 tribes, and what if one of them had just got there and before they could even get the conversation out, they just started butting heads? Does that happen in life? Have you ever been in a situation where somebody didn't let you explain, or maybe they accused you of something, and before you could say, hey, that's not, it's this, the fight comes in or the punishment is dropped? We understand the positioning there. So I look at chapter 22 as a very vivid example of how we as God's people should deal with perceptions about others, or deal with things that maybe we think, well, that looks bad, that looks wrong. Now, what should I do for the person who's involved in that thing? So remember, you had that 2.5 tribes, they had gone home, and on the other side of the Jordan, they built that huge old altar. Maybe out of envy, what are they doing? They go over there and they say, we just did this to make sure we remembered each other. Not to dishonor God, not to blaspheme Him, not to worship here instead of where God told us to. Now, verse 30. The fellow Phinehas, this is the chief priest of the time, he went to hear this message, and he's coming back to tell the Jews at the tabernacle that have gathered there, and they're sitting there waiting to go to war. And he says, he heard their words. The people of Reuben, the people of Gad, the people of Manasseh spoke, and it was good in their eyes. The thought is Phinehas went over there, heard their message, and he said, there's nothing wrong with what's going on here. So, heard this message, middle of verse 31, it says, today that we know that the Lord is in our midst, because you have not committed this breach of faith against the Lord. Now you have delivered the people of Israel from the hand of the Lord. The image there is, they're saying, it's great that we didn't just go ahead and get into a fight, because nobody did anything wrong, right? It was just a misunderstanding that could have become a really big issue. But he says, thank God that we're all saved. I think that's how we should approach misunderstandings, right? Or even when we see somebody in sin, what steps should we take according to this? All right, gather together. What are they doing? All right, let's go over and let's see what they're doing. All right, it's not what we thought, so come back and here's what they're doing. It's okay, there's no problem. Or if it was an issue, we deal with it. Wouldn't it be great if people dealt with problems that way? Wouldn't it be great if we could deal with issues the same way between each other? How much better off would families be if this was the pattern that we followed? kind of get where we're going with this? This is God's people. That's how he wants us to act. I might tie in the thought from James, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and what? Slow to wrath. That's the same setup, isn't it? Hear what the other party has to say, quick to hear, slow to speak. Make sure you hear all of the situation, the information, so that we can understand fully. And then be slow to anger. If anger is necessary, go that route. If not, correct and guide or whatever's needed. That's what these people are doing. Now look at the end of the chapter, verse 34. It says, "Now, and the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, called the altar witness." So essentially, this big old stack of stones that they made, they called it, "This is our witness." So they're standing there pointing at this, however big they made it, a stack of stones, saying, "This thing reminds us," it is the evidence of this next statement. "For they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God." Now remember what the brothers said, or the Phineas said. He said, "Now if you're over there in that land and it's too rough, and you're dealing with too many false doctrines or false gods, and you're falling to those, you can come back over here and find a place of rest." But he's like, that's exactly the opposite of what we're doing, right? What are we doing? We're building this thing to show that God is always going to be our God. No matter how far we get away, we can always see where home is. That's the mentality that I get from it. As God's people, if we're all pointed toward home, now what's our home? Where are we all pointed? Heaven, Christ, God, again, same place. If we're all going that way, don't you think we could all get along? Don't you think we could all help each other along the path? At least listen to the person walking beside us before we start telling them, hey, you need to go somewhere else because you're not right. I think that's the setup. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. And it's and I think that's the way most of the time it is. It's usually something maybe we think too much of, or maybe we know we phrased poorly, but because of lack of communication, that lack of going to the brother or going to the offending party and saying, hey, what's up? What needs to change? What needs to be fixed? Hey, you come over here or I'll come over there. It's almost like in the New Testament, it follows that same teaching where it's the thought of, when we're offended, we go to the brother. If they don't accept it, we go back with two more. And then if not, we bring the elders, and then you establish the evidence. Now again, I think I've probably hit this one a whole bunch, but you get the idea here. God's people are willing to listen and talk and hear things through, even with, the Gibeonites that deceived them, right? They were willing to hear the tale of here's the fruit or the bread, the moldy clothes and falling apart shoes, those kind of things. We need to be willing to listen to people, but act when necessary. All right, let's move into chapter 23. Any thoughts or comments with chapter 22 and the thoughts we were discussing? All right, chapter 23, we have Joshua probably another 10 plus years down the road. So they've accomplished the conquest, or again, majority of it. The rest of the fighters have gone back to their inheritances. So he calls everybody to come and listen to them. After a long while, when the Lord had given a rest to Israel from their surrounding enemies, now notice here the phrasing, Joshua was old and well advanced in years. Now, by this time, I think, best estimate I can give you is mid-80s to mid-90s, somewhere in that framing. So he has lived a life, 40 years-ish in the wilderness, another 28 fighting this conquest. And now for 10 years plus, he's been able to rest in the land. Maybe they're building up, partaking of the vineyards, this land that's flowing with milk and honey. But notice what he does. After this long time, he gathers all of the people, again, to him, sends out this message. Very first thought is, I'm old and well advanced in years. He agrees with God. Now, I don't know why, but that just echoes with me that God's like, okay, here's who he was, and Joshua's like, yep, I'm old. I'm past my age of being able to influence things like I used to. But look what he does, verse 3. He says, now you, all Israel gathered there. He's sitting back. At the end of the chapter, he kind of makes the thought of, I'm about to die. He thinks he's on his deathbed. Or at least he's near enough that, hey, I'm going to give my last final charge to everybody. So that's the mindset of Joshua. He says here, I'm old, but you have seen what God has done for you. Now, then he'll go into this kind of stepping through all of the stuff they've done. God helped them when they were fighting against these different nations, how they were able to beat these people that outnumbered them. I think I don't remember if it's this chapter or the next that talks about how their fighting men were as strong as 1,000 to 1. The point being, he's saying, look at how great and mighty our God is. Now, just for a second, I know we've mentioned these thoughts before. Think about the miracles that some of these people witnessed. All of them for sure saw the 40 years in the wandering, right? The manna, the quail, the continual providence of clothing that never wore out, or the food that was always there for the taking, the battles that were just always being won, the failures too. But those people are looking back saying, the same God that did that for us, now we're standing in the land that he promised our fathers. That's what Joshua's setting them up for. Remember all that we have been through. Remember all that God has done for us. Now, let's look at verse 9. He says, for the Lord has driven out before you a great and strong nation. As for you, no man has been able to stand before you this day. Here it is, verse 10. One man of you puts flight to 1,000. The image there is, you guys are strong and powerful. Joshua is saying, look at our might. We're not big. It's not because of us, our numbers, or our chariots, or our weapons, but it's because of what? Our God that did all of these things that he's reminding them of. All right, continue on verse 11. Here's the warning. Be very careful, therefore, to do what? What's the commandment that he says be very careful of? Love God. Now, there's a lot of things we can be careful of, right? But that's an odd one to say, be careful to love God. But he kind of goes on to explain what that is. Look at verse 14, if you would. Verse 12. For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of the nations remaining among you. Now, I think this is where the problems are going to be presented for those factions, those groups that they allowed to stay or chose not to drive out or couldn't drive out. So, if you turn back, cling to them, make marriages with them, associate with them, then know for certain that your God, or the Lord your God, will no longer drive out these nations from you. They are point blank told by Joshua here, who in his mind is sitting on his deathbed. So he's saying, for your future, for your best interest, make sure you don't have any dealings with those people. We know they're there. It's kind of like us. We know that the world's always going to have some influence over us, right? No matter how godly, no matter how much we focus on this, there's always going to be, I don't know why my example is always that person that cuts me off in traffic. Probably a weakness of mine, but there's always going to be something like that, right? But the thought is, these people Our God is always there. Don't go back to those things. Don't let those things influence us or be associated with us. Remember, the New Testament describes this as take them and cast them out or put to death those things. All right, verse 14 now. He says, I am about to go the way of the earth. Again, here's that phrasing. My life is at its close. No, nothing wrong with this. He is just making a statement about where he is in his life. But notice what he says. You know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that what? He says, everybody standing here listening to my voice knows this one thing. And what is that one thing? Nothing that God says has what? Has failed or hasn't come to pass. The thought is, he's standing there at the end saying, look at all our might, look at the victories that we've had, look at what we accomplished through God. But it's not because of our strength, right? Because it's 1 to 1,000. But it's because of the promises that God made to us, promises he made to our forefathers, our ancestors, all the way back to Abraham and even further. The thought is, we stand here because God told us we would. We stand here because God said it, we obeyed, we followed, we wandered whatever was needed, and now we stand here. I think that's very vivid imagery for the Christian life, isn't it? There's the pillar of fire leading me. I don't know where it's going, but I follow it. I'm going to end up home. Look at verse number 15. He says, he's trying to get them to remember this. Verse 15, the first half. But just as all good things that the Lord has promised you concerning you have been fulfilled for you. Essentially, he's saying, remember all the good things that happened. The might, the power of God. He said we were going to leave Egypt. We were going to conquer this nation. And now here we stand. Again, he's had several decades, years to enjoy the land that God promised. But notice the second half of verse 15. So the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things until he has destroyed you from off the good land that the Lord your God has given you. What's he saying? If God promised you good things and they happened, what's the other side of that coin? You're going to have to deal with the consequences of your actions, right? The thought is God set you up to get you here. The promise is fulfilled. There is no variation or turning unless it's on man's kind, right? You next generation, remember that. God is always there. The might, the strength, it's not in us. But he says God gave you good, but he's also going to take away if need be. Then the last part of the chapter there just kind of redefines or digs deeper into that thought. But notice the last few thoughts of verse 16. It says, then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly from off that good land that the Lord has given you. So twice, just real short, he said, God gave, but what can God also do? It's almost like God is consistent, right? That it's us that makes the misunderstandings and the misapplications, and we get things mixed up. God's saying, Joshua is saying to the people about God, he gave, he can take away. Be faithful. Do what he says to do. Now, that gets us to chapter 24. Now, Joshua thought he was dead. He thought he was at the end of his life. According to historical Jewish teachings, rabbis, people who have spent their lifetime just looking at, this relationship, say that it's probably another 5 or 10 years after chapter 23. Now, that doesn't really matter for us, but it just gives us a time frame for what's going on. So, again, verse 1, it says, Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, the officers of the people, and they presented themselves before God. So again, the image there is Joshua gathers the people. Now, Shechem, I'm pretty sure that this is where the temple is at the time, that they're gathering there around this place of worship, again, with Joshua as the instigator or the lead of this. Now, verse 2, he says, long ago, or, well, it sets him up. Joshua's talking to the people. Now, how do most fairy tales start? Most kids' stories. It's almost like it's really repetitive, right? It's almost like there's a setup that works to get people to understand something very simple. Long ago, what happened? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, the slavery in Egypt, the wandering in the wilderness. That's what he's doing the first part of this chapter. He is saying, remember who you are. For us, the equivalent would be, think of your life before you became a Christian. Maybe the last few weeks or months leading up to that, maybe how chaotic or difficult they were. That's the image there. But once we become a Christian, we need to remember how difficult things were before God. What did the Israelites do consistently when they were in the wilderness about their food? God, why not? Remember that. Remember this. And yet there was a pile of food every morning when they woke up. They weren't content. It's this thought of, I forget that these are blessings. I forget that this is the goodness of God. I don't deserve any of this, right? Versus the entitled individual. Joshua standing there at the end, again, it's this thought of remember who gave us our strength. Remember where we came from. Don't fall back into the teachings of these nations that are still here. Skip down to verse 14 and 15, because out of the book of Joshua, have y'all heard this statement made before? Verse 15, Joshua said, as for me and my house, what? Okay, so you have heard it, all right. But the thought is, think of all of the context leading up to this. When I was little, I say little, young to teenager, young adult, I had always thought that this statement was made when Joshua was young, right? Maybe that spy, maybe that first battle he led, maybe when he had his kids, it was this statement of, I'm going to make sure my family serves God. I've made this statement about me and my family, right? Looking at my boys, I'm going to make sure they try. I'm going to do everything I can. But this is made at the end of Joseph's life. He's sitting there about to die, looking at his family, looking at the rest of Israel, and this is the statement he makes. He says, everybody, remember what our fathers did. Remember the God that we had. Now, verse 14 and 15. This is to the people. Now, therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river in Egypt, and do what? Serve God. The statement is serve God. Now, again, all the build up to it. But he simply says, you guys make sure you're serving God. Now, continue on verse 15. It says, and if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the regions beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. Now, here's the statement we often, bring out and focus on. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But again, remember all the build up to this. He's sitting on his deathbed, essentially, looking out at this nation that has fought and bled and worked for this land that God promised them, and they inherited it. They sent the other tribes home, right? But he says, remember to keep God first. Those of you that are Christians, do you still have to fight the fight of faith even though you are a Christian? Sometimes do you have to battle against those fiery darts of Satan every day? Right? The fight still is waged, but we just know we're on the winning side. The image here is, guys, we fought for this. We worked. It was God's strength, but look at how everything shifted to get us where we are. Keep your focus on that God. Now, after this, verse 16 down through about verse 22, you have, well, I guess it's further than that, really, I guess through 28 or 29, you have this kind of back and forth. And that's pretty common during this time to have the one in authority speak and then the people speak out or respond to it. This back and forth is essentially them saying, we're going to serve God. You don't have to worry. This is our witness. We are witnesses against ourselves. I think that's how Joshua phrases it to them. He says, you're a witness against yourself. Now, what does that phrasing mean to you? Witness against yourself. If I come up to you and I give you an IOU that has your handwriting, your signature on it, what would that be? A witness against yourself. I am saying I am a Christian. I am making that witness to you guys. So what should my life then do? Back it up. The thought is they're standing there. Joshua's saying, choose who you're going to serve, either the gods of the Amorites or the gods of the nations that we destroyed. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of situation, how I see it. Because he's like, are you going to serve these gods that we just rolled over? Are you going to serve, the gods of Jericho, whose walls we walked around and just destroyed? What about the Philistines who, again, the thought is, choose God. Back and forth there, your statement, your confirmation, your words, they're going to be a witness against you. Now notice verse 26. After all of this is done, after they have this back and forth, after the people say, we are going to serve God, Joshua does this. He essentially writes it all down, his account of it. More than likely, that's where we get the bulk, I guess you'd say, of this book. There are some sections that are probably added by author of Judges some contemporary sources of the time, just to get some of the wording that we have there. But again, that doesn't damage the text or the inspiration at all. But the thought is, we have Joshua who is saying, here's what we've talked about. Here's what you said. Here's what I said. Here's what happened. Here's what God wants you to do. Here's your response. And he wrote it down, and what's the phrasing? He put it, verse 25. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, put in place statutes, rules for them at Shechem. Joshua wrote the words of these book of the law of God, and he took a large stone, set it under the terebinth. Essentially, that would be a portion of the place in the tabernacle. He got this stone and set it there and said, okay, this is your remembrance. Now, we don't have the table anymore, but what do they normally say? The Lord's Supper sits on it. Do this in remembrance. No, do we need the words? Do we need the table? Do we need the stone there for us to remember? No, but it's that sign that every time we walk by, every time we read it, every time we look at it, it's a spark in our mind, right? It's like that huge pillar that they made, the 2.5 tribes. That way everybody will remember our connection. It's the same thought. But Joshua takes this, he writes it down, he sets it there, he puts it and says, okay, verse number 27. Joshua said to all the people, "Behold this stone, witness, for it has heard all the word the Lord had spoken to us. Therefore it shall be a witness against us, or against you, lest you deal falsely with your God." Then Joshua sent them away, every man to his inheritance. So the image there is they've won the inheritance. They are populating the land now. They're home. And Joshua is saying here at the end, all right, we've had this conversation. I've told you, serve God. Think about how great He is, what He's done for us. Now here's this stone. It's going to be your remembrance. But He gives them this key thought for the remembrance. If you deal falsely with God. So every time they looked at that stone, every time, those heads of the family, every time those people that were there listening to Joshua came up to the temple to worship or the tabernacle to worship, they'd see that stone and what would they think? Now, I remember when Joshua said, XYZ, Mama said XYZ, and, we responded. And I think this building, this constant repetition, this remembrance, these thought of, here's a witness for us to remember our relationship and God's relationship with us, builds up to what happens after Joshua's death, or at least how it's described. So look at the end here. Verse 31. It says, Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, and all who had known the works of the Lord, or works that the Lord did for Israel. So, verse 31, how long did these people stay faithful to God?
2 generations.
All right. In this section, it's the thought of, the adults that guided them through the wilderness, conquered the land, and then also those kids that grew up maybe in the wilderness, maybe they grew up as conquering the land, and they saw mom and dad and, what God helped them do. Those stayed faithful. Now, verse 32. Now, as for the bones of Joseph, now, we haven't had those mentioned in a very long time, have we? The thought is, all the way back in Exodus is when they were brought up with the people as they're leaving. 40 years, 28 years that they've spent in conquest, maybe another 25-ish of trying to settle the land completely. And the bones of Joseph have just been waiting there. So, 32, these bones are buried at Shechem, the piece of land that Jacob bought, sons of Hazor. Skip to the end, and it became an inheritance of the descendants of Joseph. So essentially, Jacob bought a piece of land to bury his family. 450 to 500 years later, guess who owned that piece of property? The descendants of his son. Who would have known, right? Again, I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek. God has just got everything set up so perfectly. It falls out to be exactly like He said it's going to be. Then the rest of this goes on. Verse 30 talks about Eleazar, son of Aaron, and what he possessed there. But I want to go back and focus a little bit on 14 and 15 for just a moment. I think it's the perfect summary to really this entire book, right? Because this whole book was written so those in the book of Judges that we're going to discuss later on, we're going to start on those next week. It's so the people that were living during that time could read this and say, hey, that was my granddad. Or, hey, I can follow my family back up to, we camped on this side of the tabernacle, It's so that God's people could connect themselves back to what was happening during this. But it was for this point, to bring them to this conclusion. God helped you, didn't He? God got you to where you stand today. So what should you do? Serve Him. All right, let's bring that forward just a little bit for us. How do you guys stand where you stand in life? Who gave you the blessings you have? Who was able to give you the comfort or the peace or the wisdom to make it through that difficult moment? Or, maybe use the wilderness wandering as the framework. Maybe God's been providing us manna all our life, and we just have that blessing. The imagery there. So I need to remember to serve God, right? Maybe I'm sitting in my land of plenty, right? Land that's flowing with milk and honey. Maybe today's real good for me. But what do I need to remember? God got me here. God parted that river. God covered me in His blood. It's the image of we still need God. There's one last thought that I want to connect with Joshua and with the wilderness wandering before we, completely get away from it in Joshua. But when you think of your journey with God, we need to think of it in that sense of a wandering. The New Testament uses the imagery of a stranger or a pilgrim. We're that traveler in a foreign land. All right? But what did God do for these people while they were traveling? Every need provided for, right? As long as they were serving Him. Now again, there were some mess ups, some hiccups. They were only wandering because they failed in the first place. But the thought is, while they were dealing with the consequences of their actions, God was right there with them. Again, my image, that pillar of fire that was leading them by day and night. Is God there for us every day? Is He going to leave us or forsake us? Is He going to promise us something and then not deliver? Absolutely not, right? So, this world's not our home. Just a passing through, however that song finishes out. We look at this world, we look at this story of Joshua, the story of these people and their conquest, their failings, their being deceived, not going to God for guidance. We look at these things as character building for us. For them, it's the history of a nation. For us, it's how should our relationship with God be? Does God have the power and strength to bring down nations? So does He have the strength to help little old me, get where I need to go in life? Am I too small or too little for God's power to be useful? What if you were 1,000 times more effective than the competitor or the coworker or the opposition, however we need to phrase that? We would win, right? This is the image for God's people. Not ease, not a lack of difficulty, but this constant reassurance that God is always there. All right, that's all I've got for us tonight. Do y'all have any thoughts or comments before we close? Like I said, we're going to pick up with Judges next week. The sad thing is, we read how, Joshua's generation, the one after that, they stayed faithful. I don't even think we get through with chapter 1. It may be chapter 2 when that starts, but 2 chapters, and then we're introduced to God's people start falling away. They start doing what they want to do. Any of you worried about the next generation? Any of you worried about your kids in the next generation or grandkids or what's going to happen? How are we going to affect that? I don't think I can, haunt my great-grandkids to make them do what they want after I'm gone. I don't think that's an option. I wouldn't want it anyway, but the thought is we're going to leave, but we can at least leave them something that will teach them, guide them. That's what Joshua, Judges, Deuteronomy, that's what that was for this nation, for these Jews. Here's who you are. Here's who God is. Here's why you can trust Him. Now just be faithful to Him and all this is yours. For us, heaven's our home, right? I'm covered in the blood of Christ. And as long as I walk in the light as He is in the light, what? That blood continually cleanses me. We've won. The land, the promised land, Canaan land, heaven, it's there for the taking. But we have to walk the path that God has said for us to get it. All right, appreciate your time and attention. Again, pick up Judges. We'll probably get 2 or 3 chapters in next week, so y'all can go ahead and be reading that.